We'll go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen with you. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the differences between talk therapy and the work that I offer, and really through the lens of what talk therapy doesn't touch on. And so I'll start with just a couple of facts about talk therapy. So, talk therapy generates roughly $50 billion every single year in English speaking countries alone. That's a pretty significant amount of money. Uh, Hi, how are you? I was just reading the comment. Um, I'm so glad you're here. So, $50 billion dollars roughly is what talk therapy generates in English-speaking countries alone. And then when you add on things like crisis management, prescription medications, inpatient and outpatient therapies, what you're really looking at is roughly $500 billion dollars of revenue generated from people's mental and emotional instability. And then when you add on top of that and you calculate in the time that a patient will spend just on average, this isn't talking about someone who is unresponsive to treatment, but on average, an individual will spend anywhere between 12 to 18 months inside of a talk therapy program. And this is figured at like meeting once per week for that 12 to 18 months. And the research shows that this is the typical time for someone to reach meaningful results. But according to the research and what they're talking about in meaningful results is a reduction in symptom presentation. So that is not removal of symptoms, right? Like, we're not talking about identity integration. We're not talking about an individual feeling like they're building skills. And what we're really not talking about is true, lasting, transformational change. Transformational change is when the body takes our emotional or what's called implicit learnings. So these are the things that we um, emotionally learn about the nature of reality, the nature of relationships, and the nature of ourself. And we move it into something that's called explicit storage. So this is the storage that we have access to on a pretty regular basis. It's our conscious awareness. When I'm talking about the emotional learnings or the implicit learnings that we carry and that inform every single thing that we do, these live beyond conscious awareness. We don't typically have access to them just by thinking and navigating the world, but yet they inform every single thing you. And so talk therapy doesn't typically touch these emotional learnings. And most healing modalities, they will ask a series of questions or address a series of questions. And the first one being, what happened to you? Okay. And this has it has value, but knowing what happened to you is very cognitive, mentally, it sits in cognitive awareness. And this will make more sense to you in some of the next slides. And then some additional therapies or modalities will ask you, well, how did that make you feel? And this has more value, but it's still not at the root of the issue. Uh, then the next layer of questions is, or questions that will get asked is, what do you think about that? So we kind of just did this recursive loop. It's keeping things primarily in the realm of cognition. And what they often fail to ask or fail to address is which part of you am I actually talking to right now? Because you aren't just one thing, you are a collection of things or um, processes. And most of the help that exists out in the world is only reaching one of them, which is the mental model. And so you are a collection of mind, body, and soul. Sorry, there's someone else coming. Um, and in the mind, this is very cognition based. It's your thinking ability, it's your access to analyzing information. This is also where we begin to reality test, which is a really important feature of recovering from any sort of emotional, physical, mental abuse. But it's skewed when we stay only in the mind. And this is also where feeling lives. And feeling is very different than emotion. But oftentimes we can't differentiate between the two. We keep emotion and feeling blended together, which keeps us stuck in a very vicious loop. So then when we're talking about the body-based awareness, this is somatic, this is our sensation, our sensory experiences. This is where emotion lives. And then this is also where we get the rise of physical symptoms. And again, like when we're talking about the connection between the mind and body, it's really important to blend these two experiences together, but it's not enough to resolve symptoms fully. We have to bring in the third aspect, which is where our essence lives. This is our spirit, where intuition arises, or this deeper wisdom um, arises because of integration. Wisdom is not intelligence, it's not intellect. It's what arises after we integrate our life experiences into lessons. And another word that people might use for this is consciousness, right? So the mind asks, what do you think? The body asks, what do you feel? And the soul asks, who are you? And these are very different questions that get treated as separate beings, and they're not. They need to be blended together. And so when we go into some deeper understandings or deeper work, one of my favorite philosophers, understanders, thinkers is Rudolf Steiner, and he talks about the descent of consciousness. And the way he describes it as being like a step down ladder where we go from pure, unadulterated, energy, consciousness into physical form. And so this is like what we are when we're first born. We're just pure energy. This is before we have language, before we have cognition, and before our analytical mind has any sort of capacity to organize our experiences. We are just present and aware and sensing everything. And this pushes us into the somatic sensory experience. This is where we have our ability to see, our ability to touch things, taste things, smell things, hear things, right? These are all also online from day one. And this is how we predominantly navigate the world from the beginning. We register safety or threat long before we ever have any language or even comprehension for understanding what's happening. We are registering our mothers or our caregivers' presence through their eyes, through the way that they hold us, through our interaction and our reflection with our caregivers. This is all happening again before we ever have the cognitive capacity to understand what the world is teaching us. And then we have the mind, which is the slowest to develop, yet it's one of the most dominant because the world demands it from us. We begin to disconnect from these other two aspects of ourselves when we start learning language. When, we wear diapers, that's one of the ways that we disconnect from our somatic sensation. Um, we begin to navigate the world through our cognitive capacities. And the older we get, it seems the more disconnected we become from the other two. And this is all just because this is the world that we live in. This is the what the world demands of us, essentially. And so right now, there's 100% of our cognitive capacity or our cognition determines nearly 100% of our experienced reality. Your brain is literally being bombarded with millions and millions and millions of bits of information every single second that you are processing, yet your conscious mind only integrates about 40 to 50 pieces of information at any given time. So the rest is filtered out entirely, meaning you miss 99% of objective reality, and you are only experiencing this really highly edited version of reality and we call it a narrative, but most people don't understand that we have put this into a narrative. And we also still don't understand that even if our 100% of our experience is being filtered through our mind and developing some sort of narrative, that 100% of our sensory experience is still informing that narrative. So what this often looks like is you assume your negative emotions or your emotions in general reflect the objective truth of any given situation. And we assume that our emotions are the truth of reality, or that because we can sense something, that we know the truth of what someone else is experiencing or thinking, or why they're reacting the way that they are to you. And we call this truth. We say that, well, this is true because this is what I feel. Um, and this is so detrimental to individuals' mental and emotional well-being. You will, not just you, but in general, we will sit and argue our truth with someone else and think that there's one right answer, when in reality, you and I are having two very separate experiences, even if we're sitting at the same dinner table, eating the same food, engaged in the same conversation. We are having very different objective realities, and it is all influenced by the way that our cognitive mind has constructed reality based on all of our past experiences, emotions, and all of that. So when you factor in these two things alone, our cognition and our sensory experiences, this often leaves very little room for our soul or our spirit to come online and have any sort of influence in our day-to-day interactions. Most of us maybe have a fleeting thought or moment throughout the day where we let ourselves relax just enough to like try to remember who it is we are, or maybe we have a minor moment of in awe or like whimsical experience that kind of pulls us into the present moment, and we remember that there's something much larger than ourselves and all of this craziness or chaos that we're experiencing all of the time. But we only allow ourselves a 10-second experience, a 30-second experience, and then we're off into the analytical, cognitive aspects of ourselves again. And we've lost touch with all of this. And the reason that this is important to understand and what I'm talking about, what talk therapy misses, is talk therapy keeps you up in that analytical mind. It keeps you in the narrative-based experience. And we have enough research, we have enough philosophers, we have enough information built to show us that there is more than what our thinking mind can do for us. So I already mentioned Rudolf Steiner and his concept of the descent of consciousness, right? Now we can bring in the information from someone like Wilhelm Reich, where he talks about armoring. So we have the descent of consciousness, where pure energy goes into physical matter. And then we have armoring, which is this psychological defense mechanism that is built in to protect ourselves from chronic threat or pain or suffering. And if you want to understand what this is like, think about being a 3-year-old child who mommy just yelled at them, or maybe dad yelled at them, and they don't quite have the vocabulary or cognitive capacity to defend themselves from the emotional experience that they're having. So they'll do something like clench their fist, clench their jaw, and maybe, squint their eyes. That's a form of armoring. They're trying to protect their physical form from the emotional or sensation, or their somatic experience that they're having of mom is mad at me. And they don't have the ability to make sense of why or what to do with that. So they armor up, they lock up. And then we have the research from Dr. Robert Navio, which is called the cell danger response, that describes what happens at the cellular level when we have this psychological, he calls it threat, not armoring, but what happens when we experience repeated psychological, emotional, mental threats over time. We have a cellular adaptation. So our mitochondria begin to alter function, the cell membranes begin to harden or stiffen, and this causes a lot of problems because they can lock things into that cell membrane, like toxins, pathogens, heavy metals, etc. But also, what's really important is that the two foundational aspects of energy production, which is iron and oxygen, they disassociate from each other, and they need to be in a coherent, cohesive relationship with each other to produce ATP, which is that cellular currency that's what gives us energy and allows us to function in our everyday life. So we have this research, we have this information available to us, yet talk therapy will keep you up in the mind and never address what's happening at the cellular level. or the in between, what's happening in our somatic awareness. So by the time someone gets to something like a diagnosis or some sort of condition like anxiety or depression, what they're seeing is the end result of this sort of psychological, mental, and emotional armoring that happens and probably happened years ago and maybe even decades ago. So we go from uh, you know, this early life experience, we start carrying all of these adaptations. And then when we get into adulthood, we end up with some diagnostic condition and we treat that at the very surface level. We're attempting to treat anxiety or depression through talk therapy, or we go to the doctor and we get prescribed medicines to treat high blood pressure or metabolic conditions, thyroid conditions, autoimmune conditions, when the reality is that this situation didn't happen yesterday and it didn't happen overnight. This is decades in the making, and we need to address all layers of physical form in order to reverse symptoms. And so talk therapy builds insights, it builds narrative, it helps you process your story. It's valuable, but it's incomplete. And then we have somatic therapies where it brings the body more into awareness, and it's closer, but it's still leaving out our essence and who we are underneath all of it and why we adapted the way that we did. Somatic therapy really tries to bring in a lot of the psychoeducation and says, well, it was because you were people pleasing or you're a perfectionist or whatever it is, and tries to use that language to describe why your body has adapted the way that it has. But I take it one layer deeper and we look at what your essence is telling us, not what I'm telling you, not who I think you should be, and definitely not what the rest of the world thinks you should be. So while I'll use a little bit of language around people pleasing or perfectionism, I don't often use language like that. I don't use words like narcissism. I don't use words uh, that the rest of the world does, because what they're describing is the adaptation. That is not the resolution. And what I'm looking for and how I help clients is we go into the root of what was there, what before all of this started. So it's a little bit different than a lot of spiritual frameworks that are out there, because a lot of spiritual frameworks will pull you out of the body. They'll give you a language around unity, they'll give you language around expansion, but unity only has meaningful impact once you've learned how to differentiate. And one of the primary issues that individuals have from not healthy, cohesive early life experiences is that they're enmeshed with their environment. They're enmeshed in their relationships. They're codependent. They triangulate. Even people who think that they don't really do. And one form of enmeshment is the inability to differentiate between emotion and sensation, or emotion and feeling, which is the narrative, right? So, what oh, so back to the spirituality. So, spirituality attempts to pull you out of the body and give you this language, which can often lead to further destabilization. What I do is I pull you back in to the body. We create unity between mind, body, and soul, but we have to be able to differentiate those three things. what language is the soul speaking, what language is the body speaking, and what language is your cells speaking. So we build inside of cell to soul, we build this entire framework for you, not what I tell you is your experience. So you cannot regulate a nervous system that has no ground to stand on. The nervous system is the bridge that is telling you it's the bridge between the mind and the body. And it's like a scoreboard or a reader board. It's telling you that something is off, but you can't control your nervous system. If you've ever reached for nervous system regulation strategies, you might be familiar with the fact that you have to constantly rely on them to stay stable or to have any sort of stability or like a meaningful experience with stability. That is not resolution. That is another band-aid. And emotions are one step up from the nervous system when we're talking about creating stability and understanding how your emotions influence your nervous system, but also that emotions are instructions. They have a very specific completion point, and when you can start integrating that information as completion points, you automatically start unburdening your nervous system. And then when we get into months 4, 5, and 6, we really begin to go deeper into that soul level language. It's introduced in the beginning as just a foundational framework, but really later on in the program is when that excavation process really starts happening, and we integrate all three components into the program or into the framework. And a lot of times, what clients start telling me is that they feel lighter, and it's not lighter as in cognitive airy lighter, which if you understand like spiritual concepts at all, or um like meditation, any sort of thing, that feels lighter and it's airy and it pulls you out of the body. What I'm describing as lighter and clients are describing as lighter is the physical body feels lighter because you've created space for that energy to move. Also, the reunification of iron and oxygen at the cellular level means that you are creating energy quite literally at the mitochondrial level. And this feels more cohesive, more balanced, more fluid. Um, Clients describe not needing certain mental and emotional crutches that they needed for years and years. Now they can move through their daily lives with this overall feeling of like stability, of feeling like they can trust themselves, feeling like they have some sort of ground floor underneath them. I have watched some really profound transformations from this exact framework. The only difference between the new framework and the way that I've run it before is that I put it into a very specific 6-month arc. So there is a entry point and an exit point. You come in, you know exactly what the expectations are, you have the ability to engage in a very meaningful way, and then at the end of the 6 months, you have a choice. You can either exit the program, you can choose to do one more round, or you can choose to move into tier 2, which is where we really begin to do some like identity deconstruction and rebuilding. So this is what what I offer inside of Cell to Soul. This is the information and the foundation of lasting transformational change. And Marty has been around for a while. Marty has engaged with my content for quite a bit. I think I'm not sure how to say your name. Is it Mishi Don? Has also been in the program for quite a while. If either one of you wanted to step forward and share any insights or information or transformation that the program has provided you, I'd be happy to let you take the floor for a second. And if not, that's okay too. I put you on the spot.
I'll speak, Kelly.
Thanks, Marty.
Yep. Um, I noticed I've been to talk therapy for multiple years. I've had a lot of trauma throughout my life, starting from the get-go, and I have not found anything close to what you provide. And it's so strange because if you this little introduction, not little, but you know what I'm saying. This introduction makes so much sense, and uh it kind of changes the whole game because you spend so much time in therapy and it's nothing. You're just going around in circles. You know, I feel like with your soul to cell or cell to soul, it's it's just it definitely starts making you break down the important parts. And instead of thinking, oh, it's my story or, all of those, it like, I don't know how to explain it, but it makes from a different capacity of looking at yourself and saying, why can't I make this work for myself? Like, I talk every single week. I'm going through my issues, but you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
I've gotten so much insight from this. So that's my
Yeah.
2 cents.
Well, thank you, Marty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have questions for me?
No, no.
Okay.
I was just gonna kind of go off of a little bit of what you said. Yeah, I spent nearly 20 years in talk therapy. I tried so many different things, and it's interesting. Once I got on the other side of it, and I looked back at a lot of my experiences inside of talk therapy, uh, I would leave a session and feel more activated than I was when I went into the session. So it was like stirring up all of this stuff inside of me with zero resolution. Now I know talk therapy has evolved and they're integrating, different strategies and teaching you a little bit about breath work and maybe a little skill building. Um, but it's not, there's no resolution in that 60-minute time frame. Like you walk away and you're just it was more destabilizing for someone like me. Uh, and I think that that also gives me some really critical insight into what works and what doesn't. Now, I'm not saying that like I'm 100% right and I have it all figured out, but having lived all of this experience, having my own history of childhood trauma, talk therapy, trying all these other modalities, and really then transforming my own life gives me a different perspective on how this whole process works and allows me to sit with individuals in a way that maybe a lot of therapists can't do or haven't done, or I don't know. It just something to think about. But Thank you, Marty, for sharing that. And I'm always so appreciative of your insights and your shares inside of the group and when you come to these calls. So thank you very much. Um, all right, well, we're a little bit over time, and I wanted to really keep this short and just, kind of highlighting all of the benefits of what the Self Soul program offers. And I want to say thank you to you ladies for coming today and trusting in me and wanting to listen to anything I have to say. So I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day and yes, thank you. Yeah, yeah. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Bye bye.